My name is Killon. I started DJing in the early 60s. I actually come from London. I was born in the East End, but I spent most of my life in Liverpool, so I'm adopted Scouse.
My name is Doreen Allen and I come from the dark side, the Wirral, but I'm an adopted Scouse as well. Lived in Liverpool for 40 years. I worked at Eric's for 3 years, from the day it opened till the day it closed. And basically I ran the office, signed people's memberships, worked on the door, probably did nearly every job in Eric's that there was. Worked on the bar, worked in the kitchen. I ran the office in Eric's.
I was given the job of DJ at Eric's because after seeing the Sex Pistols at the upstairs part, it moved down to what used to be the Revolution, and I mistakenly said to Roger, "Oh, you know, I'll DJ for nothing," and of course he kept me to that for about a year. So I DJed at Eric's for quite a long time. The art school dance was usually the end of the year dance put together by the student committee, I assume. I never went to art school. I was working from the age of 15, but I went to this particular dance in mid-70s because there was a free bar, basically, and I walked in, and the problem with the free bar was there's a huge queue. Students loved to drink, and I drank at the time, so you'd get one drink, you'd polish that off fairly quickly, and then you have to go to the back of the queue. But while I was there, I saw this group on stage that I didn't know anything about and never seen before, and they were called Deaf School. Must have been about 13 or 14 people on stage. You know, it was fairly incoherent, most of it, but there was a little spark of interest that was completely different to what was happening musically in Liverpool at that point.
Doreen, could you tell me about the pub scene?
I used to put the bands on in O'Connor's Tavern in the early 70s. The pub scene at the time was mostly heavy metal bands, but also I used to go and see the Liverpool scene at the Everyman. And of course Mike Evans, that's my association with Deaf School, but when I first saw Deaf School, Mike Evans was in Deaf School, so I'd already seen him be with the Liverpool scene.
Well, in Liverpool in the early 60s there was a popular culture, arts, cross-reference, music, poetry, performance art, and Adrian Henry, I think, was the main person that brought all this together. He would have happenings in the Hope Hall, which was in Hope Street, that eventually became the Everyman, and other people like John Gorman, who became part of the Scaffold, and then Mike McCartney, stroke McGear, was involved, and all these interesting things were going on. At that point I was DJing at the Sink, so I wasn't able to really go and see that, other than when some of these people would appear at the Sink. So you were getting a flavour, if not being in the whirl of it at that point.
And was John Lennon, the Beatles around? Were you aware of them?
Well, John Lennon by 63, yeah, they'd gone. I mean, Love Me Do came out in 62. There was a famous thing that was in a story in the Echo that I debunked, which went into the Echo, that when some owners took over the building of what was the Rumbling Tongue Stroke Sink, they found a mural on the wall, and they told the paper, "Oh, John Lennon painted this." Well, as the Sink downstairs didn't open until 63, they'd gone down to London by then, so John Lennon had nothing to do with it.
Doreen, can you tell us the story about going to Granada Studios with the Liverpool scene?
Yeah. O'Connor's hired a coach, O'Connor's Tavern hired a coach for 40, 50 of us to go down to go over to Manchester to Granada Studios when Liverpool scene were recording. I think they did 3 numbers for, and it was an early afternoon show, well, early evening show. I think it was between 6 and 7 they were on. So we all went over to Granada Studios and we were in the audience. And they gave us our tea and we watched the programme go out. And it was a brilliant it was a brilliant day. It was really good.
To go back a bit to the early 60s, there used to be Panto Week. The students used to do Panto Week, and we'd be out selling the Panto mag. Well, one year there was an EP that came out with Mike Hart's Roadrunners, and they recorded, I think, 3 tracks that was given away with the Panto magazine. So there we had music and the student world, well, quite a lot of them probably art students, connected.
Were you aware of what was going on up at the art school and bands forming?
Me, no, I can't say that I did. If I heard of something that was interesting, then I would take note. But the first real art school band that came within my sphere of interest was, of course, Duff School.
Doreen, could you talk about Roxy Music, 1972?
Yeah, Roxy Music. I was working with a guy who promoted Roxy Music, one of their first Liverpool gigs in 1972. And that was at the music room in St George's Hall. And I was probably the first person to listen to their first album. We got the white label copy, and I remember playing it and thought, this is a bit different, I don't know. I couldn't quite get it at first, and I played it again. And I played it about 3 times, and then I was so into them. I just loved them, just something totally different.
So can you describe that night? What was it like? What were they dressed like?
Oh, they were just... Never seen anything like it. They came on that stage in the most amazing surroundings anyway. They couldn't have got any better place to play. And they just looked incredible. The only other band possibly I'd seen sort of look that good was the New York Dolls. It gave me that sort of, just impression that they just looked so different from what the norm of the bands that I had been seeing. Who used to come on in jeans and actually Roxy Music gave me a lift home later on that night because they were playing in Chester the next day, so they were staying in Chester that night, so they actually gave me a lift home.
Were you aware that they were an art school band? Were they different?
Yes, because I had read up a bit about them. I was aware that they were an art school band, yes.
Could you just tell us the story about how you ripped up John Lennon's birthday card?
When I was working in Eric's, a film crew came down Matthew Street one day. I think it was 1979 when Paul McCartney was playing the Royal Court, and a film crew was filming in Matthew Street, and I was in my office in Eric's. I had the door open, and a guy came in and asked would I do an interview. And I actually had seen the Beatles twice, but I wasn't going to say that because it wasn't a very punk thing to say that I'd seen the Beatles twice. But funnily enough, a couple of weeks before, I'd got a birthday card through the post because the postman always used to put anything to do with the Beatles in Eric's post. And there was a birthday card for John Lennon from America, I think it was from. So I just ripped it up and put it in the bin. So I waxed lyrical on television about it. And it was on the news that night. I remember Roger Eagle, who owned Eric's, came in the next day and played hell with me that had said that. He said I'd brought Eric's into disrepute. To this day I don't know why. But even worse than that, it was in one of the Sunday papers. and it said, Doreen Allen's secretary at Eric's told them what had done, said, the dream is over.
The Albert Dock Sex Pistols gig, practically, from what you can gather, all of Liverpool were there, but at the most I think there was probably about 70 people. And I don't specifically remember Albert Dock that night. I do remember them later, downstairs part of Eric's. But the Sex Pistols themselves, I think it was Glenn Matlock that broke a string, and there was this long hiatus, and Johnny Rotten was resting on his microphone stand, sneering at the audience for a great length of time, I remember. When I went round to a friend's the following day, he said, what did you think of them? And I thought, well, I'm not sure yet. There does seem to be something there, but I'm not quite sure. So that was my memory of the Sex Pistols.
Were you aware that with Deaf School and Albert Dock and Yachts something interesting was happening?
Very, very much so. We'd been living with that certain type of music that previously gone before for quite a long time, really. And I was working in Probe in the Silly Billies branch for a few years, and you'd play records that reminded you of things that you already knew. Robin Trower reminded you a bit of Jimi Hendrix, so you'd be playing that. But after a while you just got pretty bored of it. And then Deaf School came along with this, a bit like Roxy music, and obviously they were influenced in many ways by Roxy music. They brought a whole different feeling to it. When you asked me about did I know about previous art school bands, well, of course I knew about the ones that were in London, but the only one I remember specifically in Liverpool up to that point was Deaf School. I remember seeing Albert Dock, and I'm not quite sure who they were supporting, but there was one member of Albert Dock came through the audience eating an apple, which was that kind of art school feel. It wasn't just a band playing. They wanted to do things that were, in a sense, happening. This could be possibly, not that I remember any going on there, but you could imagine a bit of poetry going on, as well as a song, as well as something amusing. So yeah, it reminded me of some of the things in the early 60s. I saw Yachts on the ferry, and I think they were supporting Elvis Costello, and they're always good fun. Henry Priestman and John wrote some quite sophisticated lyrics, I would say. But they had that, because Henry liked 60s American garage bands. They were kind of like that tight kind of little unit. Well, the Mellatones were, I think, just going through the paces, really. I mean, there wasn't anything exceptional there. I'm sorry, Martin. No, put this out. But yeah, they were good fun to watch on the night, but I don't think it would ever transfer to any kind of long life.
So Alan Peters, Almost Blues, and then he went on to 29th and Dearborn. It was all that pub rock stuff, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, Alan Peters has been a musician in Liverpool almost as long as Ozzy U, from the Hideaways. Probably as long as, and he's been through quite a few changes, but his main interest was always the blues, Alan. So he was in Supercharge, and he was in, as you say, 29th and Dearborn, and Lawnmower. And he's still going strong, and combining his music with poetry.
Doreen, could you tell us a little bit about the clubs?
Yeah,
That the clubs came from Birkenhead
Yeah.
School of Art.
the clubs came from Birkenhead, and I lived over in, well, the Wirral. And when I was about 16, 17, I followed the clubs around. I knew that three of them had gone to art school anyway. They were still at art school when they formed the clubs. They were only about 16, 17 at the time. And I had quite an association with the clubs. Went down to London with them, another coach. They organised a coach to get 50, 60 Birkenhead people down to London. They played a club called Tiles, which was in Oxford Street. I think that was around 1966. But they were my favourite band at the time for about 2-3 years.
And were they like the New York Dolls?
Yeah, well, I think in later years they were sort of like class. Yeah, they were like they wore makeup, you know, which in those days, you know, they were the only band I think that wore makeup. To be perfectly honest, in the middle 60s, and they just looked different, and they did a lot of covers at the time, and they played the Cavern a lot. I think they played the Cavern there more times than any other band. Oh, no.
The Hideaways, the band that played most.
Did they?
Yeah, it's just well documented. No.
Well, I did go to see the Hideaways.
Yeah, the Hideaways played more times than any other band, including the Beatles and the Cavern.
So let's talk about Deaf School's fans and how their fans have grown up. They've been very faithful, haven't they?
Deaf School fans are remarkably faithful. Not just the Liverpool fans, but there are quite a lot of fans in London, including Madness. They were one of their early fans. But yes, they quickly moved out of just having a following in the art school to almost the whole of Liverpool being enamoured by them. They were the only Liverpool group I know, you know, apart from the Beatles, that would sell out the Empire twice.
Doreen, do you think it's unfair that Deaf School have never had a hit or never became popular in the charts?
Yeah, that's normal. I think the two places that Deaf School are really popular was Liverpool and London. You know, I think in other cities they didn't. I can't even remember them playing in any other cities really. I mean, I did get the job as Deaf School fan club secretary. Frank Silver, who managed them, came up and interviewed me in Eric's. I think I'd had a slight argument with Roger at the time, and I think my job might have been a bit in jeopardy at Eric's, so I thought, right, I knew Deaf School wanted a fan club secretary, so Frank Silver came up and interviewed me, and I actually got the job. But unfortunately, I think I was the only one that went for the interview, mind you. So, and then unfortunately, Deaf School split up.
Yes, and I was in America while they did that. I
Yeah.
went over for that second tour that they were supposed to be doing, and while I was there, they split up here. But that was all right. I mean, I was enjoying myself in America anyway. But it would have been nice to have gone on the second Deaf School tour.
Would have been quite nice to do the fan club as well. But then I did end up doing Frankie Goes to Hollywood fan club anyway. So.
Did Holly Johnson go to art school?
Yeah. Well, Holly actually got accepted for art school, but he didn't actually go, because I remember when he came round to my flat and said he was going to art school, and that was just the very start of Frankie Goes to Hollywood, so he never actually went.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because that was quite arty, wasn't it? The way they were on stage. The Mojos?
Mojo as well. Funnily enough, Spencer Lee at Radio Merseyside had one of the Mojos on his programme, and I emailed Spencer saying, when we had our chip shop in Easby Road, Tillard Street, which was in Kirkdale, my memory was there was a bungalow, a prefab diagonally across from our chip shop, with the parents of one of the Mojos, and one of the Mojos used to live there. Anyway, Spencer passed my email on, and it was confirmed. He said that's where they used to rehearse, and I can't remember the person's name now off the top of my head, but yeah, that's where the Mojos were a good band. They had one of the famous actors in the latter lineup who used to be in the Professionals.
What's his name?
Lewis
Collins.
The first time I saw Deaf School, I think it was at the stadium. I was just trying to remember this. I think it must have been the stadium, and then when the stadium closed and Roger started putting on bands at the Metro, because Deaf School played the Metro nearly every week. That was just before Eric's opened. So I remember DJing for them at the Metro. I think Roger put me on the decks one night. But they did play at the first time I actually saw Deaf School was definitely the stadium.
I think they liked the theatricality of Deaf School, and in that filmic quality, where Steve Allen, alias Enrico, would dress parts and enact. It was almost, the songs were, particularly from the first album when they were on stage, the songs were almost like a play. And I think that's what the people liked. Prior to that, people had been influenced in dressing up with Bowie. They were all Bowie freaks. And Silly Billies used to come in with the Aladdin Sane slashed across the face, and they also kind of like the Mott the Hoople type of thing. But I think what they liked about Deaf School is the songs and the way they were presented on stage.
But do you think they maybe saw them as more of a show, as more of like a cabaret, as opposed to being a working band?
Yes, most certainly. And I think that probably almost certainly came from their art school sensibilities. And the musical influences were wide and vast. I remember Steve, before I really got to know him, Steve Allen, coming into Silly Billies and asking if we had a Dan Hicks and his Hot Licks LP. And I was amazed because there was only a couple of people I knew that knew about Dan Hicks and his Hot Licks. And you could hear in Deaf School some of those elements of Dan Hicks and his Hot Licks.
Doreen, do you think that Deaf School were punk at all?
I think, after the heavy metal bands, they were the next step, and then it was punk. It got us sort of like thinking, there's something different out there. So
I know for the second album, Clive had seen The Clash, and that's why the second album was a much harder, rockier kind of LP compared to the first one.
Anything else?
From me? No, I remember playing at the Metro with Deaf School one evening down Sweeting Street in town. Yeah. Funny little club, wasn't it?
I mean, it suited Deaf School. The stadium, I don't think ever suited, being on that, the stadium just wasn't the right surroundings for Deaf School to play on, in the stadium, massive big place, I think, when it was the Metro, they look, it was brilliant at the Metro, and that's, for me, that was sort of Deaf School.
The photograph of the inner sleeve of Don't Stop the World is taken at the Metro.
The Metro, and that's the night I did the DJ.
And what about Eric's? Do you think Eric's gave art school bands opportunities?
Eric's gave probably everybody an opportunity. You know, you didn't have to be a student, but yeah, obviously students went, and if they wanted to perform in any way, they could do. It's amazing the amount of people we had on, like Margie Clark, and in a way there's a connection with Margie Clark. She told me the story when we were going to Roger Eagle's funeral, that her sister used to go to the sink, but Margie always misheard the sink, and when she performed at Eric's, it was Margox and the Zinc, which was a tribute to her late sister, because she'd misheard sink as zinc.